What was the moment that made you decide being good no longer worked? I used to be the person everyone called when they needed something, the one who would drop everything to help a friend move or stay late at work to finish someone else's project. My boss would text me at 11 at night, and I would respond immediately. I would cover shifts when coworkers called in sick. I volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. I was raised to believe that kindness would always come back to you. For 5 years at Davidson Media, I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. I helped my coworkers meet their deadlines. I brought coffee for the team when everyone was stressed. I even let my boss, Diane, take credit for my ideas during presentations because she said it would look better coming from management. When my dad got sick last year, I asked Diane if I could work remotely 2 days a week to take him to chemotherapy. She sighed and said, "We really need you in the office, but I suppose we can make it work for a month or two." I was so grateful that I worked twice as hard on my office days, making sure nothing fell through the cracks. Dad's treatment was supposed to last 6 months, but after 3 months, Diane called me into her office. She said the remote arrangement wasn't working. The team needed me physically present every day, and besides, enough time had passed. I explained that Dad was only halfway through his treatment, that he couldn't drive himself, and that he had no one else. She just stared at me until I lowered my eyes and said, "I understand." I spent the next week burning through my savings to hire drivers for Dad. I was exhausted, constantly worried about him, but I was still the first person in the office every morning. Then came the Maxwell project, an enormous account that could make or break our quarter. I spent weeks researching, building the presentation, creating drafts, everything. I even missed one of Dad's appointments to finish it. The day before the presentation, Diane asked to see my materials. I handed over everything, including my speaking notes. The next morning, I arrived early, excited to present my work, only to find the conference room already full. Diane was at the head of the table, showing my slides to the clients. I stood frozen at the door as she used my exact words, my research, my ideas. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "Oh good, Jennifer, you can bring coffee for everyone. We're just getting started." The client turned to me and asked, "Aren't you the one presenting this?" Before I could respond, Diane stepped in and said, "Oh no, this is my project. Jennifer just helped with some research." I brought the coffee. I stood at the back of the room and watched as she was praised for my work. The client loved it. They signed a 3-year contract, the biggest in the company's history. When the executives came down to congratulate the team, Diane accepted all the praise. She received a bonus. She got a promotion. I got a $50 Starbucks gift card. That night, Dad called. He had fallen while trying to get from the taxi to his front door. He had been lying on the ground for 20 minutes before a neighbor found him. If I had been there, I kept thinking. If only I had been there. 2 days later, the company held a celebration for the Maxwell deal. Diane received an award. I stood and clapped along with everyone else. Then came the announcement that made everything stop. Diane would now lead a new division created specifically for the Maxwell account and needed a strong team. She spent 10 minutes talking about the qualities she was looking for, then announced her first hire, Ryan, the guy who had been with the company for 6 months and hadn't contributed a single thing to the project. I sat there stunned while everyone congratulated him. Then Diane looked at me and said, "Jennifer, I need those quarterly reports by the end of the day. I know you won't let me down." Something broke inside me. 5 years. 5 years of saying yes, of staying late, of missing time with my sick father. 5 years of watching others take credit for my work. 5 years of being good. I got up, walked to the bathroom, and looked at myself in the mirror. My hands were shaking. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. That was the moment. That exact moment when I decided being good no longer worked. I couldn't go on. I walked out of the bathroom on trembling legs, as if I were learning to walk again after a very long fall. I passed through the break room, down hallways filled with applause, with plastic smiles and lively conversations about the historic achievement that I had built with my own hands. Each step hurt. I felt betrayed, empty, used, and no one noticed. No one ever noticed. I went back to my desk without saying a word. Diane crossed paths with me in the hallway, holding the Golden Award plaque, speaking loudly with executives about the future of the division. "Jennifer is a great analyst. She's efficient," she said, like someone talking about a machine. "But she doesn't have the profile to lead." She didn't even look me in the eye. I sat down, opened the quarterly reports she had asked for, and stared at the screen for a few seconds. I couldn't type anything. My body was there, but my soul had already started to leave. I took a deep breath, forced my fingers to move, and finished the reports in silence, as I always did. When I handed everything in at the end of the day, she thanked me with an automatic smile and said, "I knew I could count on you." But I didn't reply. I just turned and walked away. I still didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I would never again be the same woman who had started at that company 5 years ago, full of hope. That night, when I got home, I found my father sitting in his armchair, his leg bandaged, his eyes full of pain. He tried to pretend everything was fine. "Just a silly fall," he said. But the way he held his arm and avoided showing his face told me otherwise. I sat next to him, took his hand, and for the first time in months, I cried. I cried like a child. I cried for him, for me, for everything I had allowed myself to become. He didn't ask anything, just squeezed my hand with what little strength he had left. In the days that followed, I went to the office as if walking on cracked ground. I started to observe everything more carefully: who kissed up, who did the bare minimum, who was always in the right place at the right time to reap what they hadn't sown. And I realized what had always been in front of me: that place didn't reward competence. It rewarded convenience, favors, appearances. That week I received a proposal from Diane. She wanted me to train Ryan to take on more strategic roles. He didn't even know how to open a panel in the system. He asked basic questions as if he were in his first internship. And I was supposed to smile and help him climb the steps that had been denied to me so he could get the credit once again. I said yes. I smiled. But inside, I started to plan. Every folder, every file, every project I had worked on over the past 5 years, I knew it all. I knew who did what, where the flaws were, where Diane had covered up mistakes, where metrics had been manipulated. And most importantly, I knew that the Maxwell client trusted the ideas I had created. They had seen me. They had asked me a direct question and only believed Diane's version because I had lowered my head. This time, I wouldn't lower it. I waited. I waited for the right moment. And it came the following week when one of the Maxwell executives scheduled a surprise visit to the office. The system went down for 30 minutes, a failure Diane had been ignoring for months, even after the alerts I had personally sent by email, without any response, of course. The client was furious. Ryan was home with a migraine. I took advantage of the chaos to send an email directly to Maxwell's IT director, attaching logs, previous alerts, and a small document with improvement suggestions that I had prepared months earlier and that Diane had filed away without reading. I signed it with my full name, without fear. That same day, I received a direct email from the IT director requesting an urgent meeting with me. Diane found out and tried to intervene, but it was too late. I was called to present technical solutions the next day, alone. This time, no one asked me to bring coffee. The presentation was clear and objective. I used the same arguments Diane had used months before, but with updated data and real solutions. The client thanked me and, as they left, said, "It's good to finally hear from the person truly responsible for the ideas we bought." The following week, Maxwell's headquarters sent an official letter requesting that any future communication about the project go directly through me. Diane lost her composure. She called me into a closed-door meeting and said I was trying to sabotage her, that I was disloyal, that she had given me opportunities. But I just stayed silent and let her pour out all her venom. When she finished, I looked her in the eye and said, "For 5 years, I was your ladder. But even ladders break when they're stepped on too much." I stood up and went to human resources. I requested a transfer to another unit within the company. Arguing that my work with Maxwell now required it, I already knew the transfer would be approved. Her name was too tarnished with the clients. Before I left one last folder on her desk. Inside were copies of all the unanswered emails, the unread documents, the ignored alerts, all signed with my name and dated. Without saying a single word, I let her watch her own castle crumble. And for the first time, walking out of that company, I could breathe, as if I had just been freed from an invisible prison. The transfer happened quickly. In less than 2 weeks, I was already settled in the Chicago branch. A completely different environment, colder, both literally and figuratively. No one knew me there, and I made sure to keep it that way. No forced friendships, no coffee confessions, no volunteering for team spirit events. I delivered my work on time and with quality, and I left on time. I avoided events. I declined invitations to team lunches. I was an efficient ghost. And for the first time, this brought me peace. But too much peace sometimes brings too much silence. The nights were long in that rented apartment. My father continued his treatment in Dallas, now with a full-time caregiver, paid with the bonus I never received but managed to cover with extra hours I sold and a small legal settlement I discreetly received after Maxwell pressured the board. Nothing scandalous, but enough to give me stability for a few months. Still, his absence consumed me. He didn't say it, but I could hear his voice weakening over the phone. His "everything's fine" seemed shorter. Sometimes I would hang up and cry in silence, sitting on the kitchen floor. What was the point of all of it if I was still losing time when he needed me the most? It was during this routine of cynicism and efficiency that something unexpected happened. I received an email from someone named Lena, from the legal department at headquarters, urgently requesting to speak about information involving the previous leadership of the Maxwell project. My instincts kicked in. I thought about ignoring it. But something told me Diane still hadn't learned. And I was right. In the video call, Lena revealed that Diane had attached altered documents to a new project, trying to reuse parts of my previous presentation but with manipulated data. The attempted fraud was only stopped because someone in Maxwell's legal department recognized the chart patterns and became suspicious. She was trying to use my ideas again, but now there was a history, and my name was too strong for this to go unnoticed. Lena was direct. They wanted my formal testimony. I accepted without hesitation. During the following week, I dove into old reports. I organized project timelines, recovered messages and email drafts that proved every step. It was no longer just about me. It was about the type of culture that woman had helped build. How many other Jennifers were out there, swallowing humiliations while covering holes for lazy managers? My final report was 48 pages long. When I submitted it, I received only one response: "Thank you. This will be sufficient." 2 weeks later, Diane was fired, not reassigned, not an early retirement, fired. For misconduct, fraud, and misuse of intellectual property. The impact was immediate. The Maxwell division, now under new leadership, contacted me directly. They asked not only for my continued consulting but also proposed that I take a new position, Director of Strategy. I declined. Just like that. Because at that moment, I realized I no longer wanted to live to prove something. Not for revenge, not to climb. I wanted to breathe. To live. To help my father without guilt. Maybe bake bread on Mondays. Maybe teach someone, honestly, if they wanted to learn. But never again would I build empires for other people to climb and spit down from above. So I left. I resigned, without fanfare, without a dramatic letter, just an email: "I appreciate the opportunities. I am leaving for new personal projects." The night I told my father, he cried, not out of sadness, but out of relief. "Finally, my daughter," he said. "Now you can live for yourself." I returned to Dallas at the end of that month. He still had sessions, but he was in better spirits. I started going with him to his appointments again. I went back to cooking for both of us. I even adopted a small dog that he ironically nicknamed Boss. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, sipping coffee on the porch, that I received a call from a former colleague, Melissa, one of the few who still respected me. "Did you hear?" she said. "Brian resigned. No one wanted to work with him. And after they discovered he was using artificial intelligence to write reports, it got ugly. He's burned." I smiled, not out of pleasure at someone else's failure, but because the truth always has a strange way of finding its way, even if it takes time. I hung up the phone and faced the reddish sky. For a long time, I had been the woman who said yes to everything, the one who believed that kindness would always come back. Today, I still believe that, but with one difference: now I choose who deserves my kindness, and that changed everything. The following weeks were quiet, but different. I woke up without an alarm clock. I made coffee the way my father liked it, strong, bitter, with a touch of vanilla. We watched the morning news and argued about politics like two grumpy old men. And by mid-afternoon, we would take a walk around the block with Boss trotting happily ahead of us. For the first time in years, I had time, real time. But too much peace usually calls to the ghosts. It was on a regular Tuesday at the market that I saw her, a woman standing in the bread section. Her hair was messily tied up, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes, Those eyes recognized me before I could even turn. Diane. Yes. Her. Without high heels, without a designer blazer, without strategic makeup, just an ordinary woman holding a basket with sandwich bread and 2 cans of beans. She walked toward me. Part of me wanted to turn and walk away, but I couldn't move. She seemed smaller now, not in stature, but in presence. Jennifer, she said, her voice cracking like shattered glass. I just wanted. I raised my hand, interrupting her. You don't need to, I said firmly. There's nothing you need to say to me. Nothing I need to hear. She bit her lip, her eyes filling with tears. For a second, she seemed like she wanted to defend herself, maybe justify herself, but she gave up. She just nodded and walked away, disappearing among the shelves like a shadow finally accepting that the light no longer belonged to her. I got home feeling lighter, not out of revenge, but because I understood something else. There's something crueler than confronting someone who destroyed you, letting them drown alone in the silence of their own decisions. That same day, while I was washing dishes, my father commented casually, "You're different, daughter." Still firm, but free. I smiled. For the first time, it made sense. It was then that something unexpected happened. A former colleague from Maxwell, now working as a freelancer at an independent consultancy, sent me a message. "Jennifer, I'm starting a project and I'd like you to participate, not as a subordinate, as a partner." I heard you're retired, but I had to try. My first instinct was to say no. But something inside me hesitated. Maybe it was the freedom to do this my own way, without a boss, without putting out other people's fires, without swallowing toads with cold coffee. I asked for more details. She sent me a simple PDF. It was a collaborative consulting platform for burnt-out professionals, experts who wanted to keep contributing, but on their own terms. It was ironic. Me, chronically burnt out after 5 years, helping others not get lost the way I had. I accepted. I started slowly, first with remote meetings, then by helping structure teams, until I found myself leading a small group. Not because of a title, but out of respect. For the first time, I was leading without having to ask. They trusted me because I was transparent, not because I bent over backward. Things flourished. I was invited to give an online talk about boundaries in the workplace. I laughed to myself before accepting. Who would have thought that I, the queen of yes, would be teaching others how to say no? That night, after ending the call with 800 people watching live, I sat on the couch with my father by my side and realized, I no longer felt anger, not sadness. I felt gratitude. Gratitude for having endured. For not having broken completely. For having been reborn. And when my father fell asleep on the couch, his head resting on boss's shoulder, I opened my laptop and wrote the first lines of a personal project I had been putting off for years, a book. 5 years of being too good. 5 years learning to be fair to myself. I didn't know if anyone would read it, but it didn't matter. It was for me, and for the girl who once believed her kindness was enough to save the world and discovered that sometimes saving herself is the first step to changing everything. The book slowly took shape. Writing it was like stitching wounds that had already healed on the outside but still burned inside. Each chapter forced me to revisit parts of myself that I had hastily buried, the humiliations disguised as compliments. The looks that passed right through me as if I were part of the furniture. The sleepless nights working on something that someone else would present as if it had sprung from their brilliant mind. But at the same time, writing made me laugh too, laugh at myself, at the naivety I once had, at how I had tried to fit into a mold that was never made for me. My father read each printed chapter, highlighter in hand. He underlined, circled words, made notes in the margins as if it were a war manuscript. "Here you should make it clearer that their cowardice wasn't your fault," he wrote once. And he was right. I still used the word fault too easily, as if their pain had been a consequence of my kindness and not of their own pettiness. In the middle of all this, I received a letter, not an email, a handwritten letter. The envelope was beige, the handwriting careful, no visible sender. I opened it with suspicion. Inside was just a single page with a few words. I was silenced too. "Thank you for speaking for us. J." No clear signature, just the letter J. That hit me harder than any award, any contract. Because it was someone, maybe from Maxwell, maybe from somewhere else, who understood, who had lived it, and who, for some reason, felt that my voice was theirs too. I carefully folded the paper and placed it between the pages of the unfinished book. The consultancy I had helped to structure was growing. We were receiving cases from across the country, psychologists, lawyers, teachers, all with similar stories. People who had been crushed by toxic environments and were now trying to rebuild their lives with dignity. We started creating small support programs, mentoring, online conversation circles. And without realizing it, I found myself leading again, but this time by choice, with purpose, without erasing anyone in order to shine. One day, in the middle of one of these meetings, a young consultant who had recently joined messaged me privately in the chat. "Jennifer, can I ask you something personal?" I typed, "Of course." She replied, "How do you know when it's time to stop being too good?" I looked at the question for several minutes. And then I replied, "When it starts to hurt and no one notices. When you cry in the bathroom and still come back with a smile. When you give everything and receive a gift card in return. That's when. It's not about stopping being good, it's about not being made of steps for others to climb." She responded with a heart emoji. And in that moment, I realized what I was becoming, what I never had, someone who would speak the truth without cynicism, who would embrace without condescension, who would inspire without draining others' energy. Months passed. My book was finished. I sent it to a few small publishers, without big expectations. I received a few rejections, but one in particular caught my attention. The letter said, "Your story is not just important, it is urgent." They published the book. It didn't become a bestseller. It didn't make me rich. But it reached the hands of those who needed it. I received messages from people I had never met, telling me they had quit abusive jobs, that they had stood up for themselves for the first time, that they had rediscovered the value of their own voice. And at one of these launch events, in a small local bookstore, a woman approached me at the end of the line, her eyes shining. "I'm the J from the letter." I froze. She introduced herself as Juliana, a former analyst at Maxwell, fired 2 years before me after reporting moral harassment and being silenced. She told me she had tried to move on, but always carried the feeling that she had failed. "When I read your story, I felt like I wasn't crazy," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved me without knowing it." We hugged. And it was there, in that silent embrace between two survivors, that I understood, what I lived through, what I endured, was not in vain. Because in the end, being too good was never the problem. The problem was believing the world deserved it, without me deserving myself. And now, I own my story. Every word. Every new beginning. The book launch was only the beginning of a new phase, one that, for many years, I couldn't even imagine was possible. I began to be invited to conferences, discussion panels, events focused on mental health and corporate environments. At first, I declined almost all of them. I still felt out of place, as if I didn't really deserve to be there. But one day, my father, much more fragile by then, took my arm and said, "You're not there to be perfect, Jennifer. You're there to be true." So I accepted an invitation to speak at a conference on workplace ethics. The hall was packed, hundreds of people staring at me, wounded hearts, anxious eyes. When I began to tell my story, without embellishments, without filters, without self-pity, I saw heads nodding in agreement. People crying. People laughing nervously. People who, like me, had been crushed by environments where abuse was disguised as high expectations. At the end of the conference, I received a line of hugs, no autographs, no forced selfies, just sincere touches and looks from people silently saying, "You spoke for me." That night, coming home, I found my father asleep in his armchair. His face was serene. He didn't hear me come in, but he smiled when I touched his hand. "How did it go?" he asked without opening his eyes. "It was beautiful, Dad," I said. It was like speaking to the Jennifer from 5 years ago, except this time, she was listening. And then he said something I will never forget. "Then now, daughter, you can rest." The following week, he passed away peacefully, in the hospital, beside me, holding my hand. Without pain. Without regrets. And with a final smile, like someone saying he could finally leave because now he knew I would be okay. The pain of the loss cut through me like a blade, but it didn't knock me down. For the first time, I knew who I was, and what he had always tried to show me, that my worth didn't depend on how much I served others, but on how faithful I was to myself. After mourning, I returned to the consultancy, not out of obligation but by choice. The project grew. We expanded our areas of operation. We helped companies recognize toxic patterns. We trained leaders not to repeat the mistakes of those who came before. We created a database of anonymous stories that became material for studies, articles, and yes, more books. Today, I am the author of 3, all born from the same seed, the story of a woman who believed kindness was a shield and discovered it was, in fact, her greatest strength, so long as it was used with wisdom. And one day, while walking with Boss, now graying at my side, I received a notification on my phone, an email from the former CEO of Maxwell. Not Diane, she had vanished from the radar, but a new manager hired after the restructuring. Dear Jennifer, we would like to invite you for a special consultancy in our new corporate integrity program. We recognize that the company's past hurt valuable professionals like you. We want to do things differently now, and we believe your experience can guide us. I laughed, not with irony, but with that lightness of someone who no longer feels anger, only clarity. I didn't respond that day, or the next. I waited a week. Then I wrote. I appreciate the invitation. Today, I only work with companies that believe in the power of transparency from the first mistake, not after the 5th scandal. I wish you success. But for me, this chapter is closed. I clicked send, closed the laptop, sat on the couch with my old dog in my lap, and looked out at the horizon. The sunset was painting gold. On the shelf, my books. In my heart, peace. It was 5 years of saying yes. It was another 5 years rebuilding every part of me that had once been told was worthless. Today, I am not good. I am fair. I am whole.